Hey everybody, welcome back to our second installment of our Why Do We series. Have some questions that have been asked, and I encourage if you have any others to send them on over my way. Just why do we? Why do we do certain things as a church here in Wisconsin Rapids? Why do we do things in a certain way as a denomination? Or why do we do certain things just because we're Christians? So hope to kind of keep these short. I guess there's some questions that may be a little longer than others. But our question this week is, why do we as Methodists participate in Holy Communion once per month? And so this week's why do we question is obviously it's about Holy Communion, the mystery of the bread and the cup, the body and the blood of Jesus Christ. And most, if not all, Christians have participated in Holy Communion. If you grew up in the church, you've seen it and experienced it on some sort of regular basis. So why do we as Methodists celebrate it once per month, and typically on the first Sunday of the month? Well, I'll answer these questions kind of in the reverse order that I asked them because, well, the last question's pretty easy. Not that the first question's all that hard, but yeah, you get my point. Anyways, the last question first. Typically, why do we celebrate it on the first Sunday of the month? If you're in a church or like ours that celebrates communion once a month, the first Sunday of the month is just simply easy to remember. First Sunday of the month, Holy Communion. So for those months with maybe five Sundays in them, that can throw some folks off. So first Sunday of the month is communion. Simple as that. So it's easy to remember. No other special reasons that I've ever heard of. And so that's that. So now the first question, why once per month? Well, it comes down a little bit to our history, especially once the Methodist Church started to expand within our country in the late 18th century. The once per month in those days, in the days of the circuit riders, would have been really a luxury. It was a lot less than once per month, maybe once per quarter, maybe once every 2 months. As these circuit riders were ordained preachers that went around to several different towns or even spots in between towns to serve the local congregations. The flood of folks heading westward was a lot faster than the Methodists could, I guess, pump out ordained pastors. And so the circuit riders were on the frontier, which was a very, very difficult life, but they faithfully served out there. So they weren't in every church in town every week. And so again, maybe these folks would get it once a quarter, once every 2 months, something like that. It probably happened in some circuits across the country, but generally speaking, the lack of ordained pastors, again, made it very difficult for every church community to practice once a month or even more. There were lay leaders who took care of sermons and some of the day-to-day business and pastoral needs. But remember, the church really wasn't like it was now, not quite as official in the days of the frontier days. So what we get is kind of this infrequent consistency of Holy Communion, and that's just how it was going to be, this infrequent consistency. And so for some churches today, that still happens. It's an infrequent consistency. For the most part, United Methodists practice this holy mystery once per month, stemming from the frontier days and the hardworking circuit riders. So a little bit of our history comes from why we have just this once per month. But I just use the phrase for the most part because there are United Methodist congregations who practice Holy Communion weekly or even quarterly. Now, by Book of Discipline, our rule book, I guess, very simply put, we're required to offer Holy Communion at least once per quarter. Now, I served a church where the previous pastor, the pastor I followed, he rarely, if ever, included communion as a part of the regular Sunday morning worship. It was offered outside of the time of worship as a separate ceremony, really. So Holy Communion practices vary within the denomination, as it does across faith traditions or other denominations. So for most denominations, Holy Communion is a sacrament being something that is holy and sacred and manifests an inward and spiritual grace that work within us because of what we're remembering Christ has done for us by an outward and visible symbol, the bread and the cup. So differences may depend on the church you grew up or in the part of the country you grew up in. Now, there isn't necessarily any right or wrong answers when we deal with the frequency, as long as it's consistently offered and practiced. Now, there are definitely many opinions, likes and dislikes, though, but they're opinions. Now, the Christian church from its early times typically practiced communion on a weekly basis. Now, by John Wesley's day, and remember he was an Anglican priest before he started Methodism, the Anglican church practiced it very infrequently. He was highly critical of this habit they'd fallen into, and he wanted American Methodists to practice it on every Lord's Day. But on the frontier, again, just wasn't possible as things expanded. Maybe it was different in the cities, but as it expanded into the frontier, it was a little different. As I mentioned earlier, by Book of Discipline, we're required to administer communion at least quarterly. However, in the official United Methodist Church document about Holy Communion called This Holy Mystery, a UMC understanding of Holy Communion, we read this, and I quote, "Congregations of the United Methodist Church are encouraged to move toward a richer sacramental life, including weekly celebration of the Lord's Supper at the services on the Lord's Day, as advocated by the General Orders of Sunday Worship in the United Methodist Hymnal and the United Methodist Book of Worship." End of quote. A little bit of a mixed message. Yeah, so what do? It comes down to local traditions and personal desires and beliefs, I guess. Myself, I wouldn't mind celebrating Holy Communion every week. I think participating in this sacred act can only help us in our spiritual journeys and our relationships with God. But everybody's got different opinions. So why do we practice Holy Communion once per month? No great theological reason, but because of our historical traditions, kind of stemming from those days of the circuit rider. Now, I gave you a little more about some of the history of communion and our tradition within this particular why do we question, but I hope it was worth it. So until next week, you guys take care.